Welcome to American Party Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, somebody that I've been following for many years, Michael Shermer. You are a historian of science. Like I've been watching pretty much every science documentary that's ever come out on anything I've watched, and you pop up a lot, and I got curious early on because you would pop up with a lot of people who were theoretical physicists and things like that. But your specialty is as a historian of science. Now, tell me about what that is.
Oh, well, so science has a history, and I'm a historian, and so we study the history of science. Essentially, that's what it is. It's looking at maybe, in my case, about the past 400 years or so. My PhD was actually in evolutionary theory and Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace and how they differed, very specific topic. But more generally, I do a lot of philosophy of science too, so it allows me to dabble in lots of different fields: physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, and that pretty much covers the gamut. And I also have graduate degrees in psychology too, experimental psych. So social sciences, and all that kind of feeds into my day job, which is, editing Skeptic magazine and writing my books and so forth. And we dabble in a lot of different topics. I need to be able to evaluate claims in any field based on the kind of evidence that they present. And that has a more general sense of the kind of thing you study when you study science
Right.
in any field.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the proclivity for most quote unquote scientists is to become very specialized at one thing or another. Right. I mean, that's just kind of how the process lends itself. But being a generalist, obviously, I think puts you in a better position than a lot of other people to explain to those without advanced degrees in science what the fuck's going on in life. You know what I mean? It can be very difficult to understand all of this stuff and what the physical universe and then sociology, how those things affect one another. Now, you mentioned Skeptic magazine. You've been pretty much the skeptic, in my opinion, over the last 30 years or so. Like somebody that's been pretty consistently prove it is a phrase you might use, right?
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of people make empirical claims without a lot of evidence. And that's always been very bizarre to me. Like, how could you be so sure? Because I've always felt pretty skeptical myself. How did you get into that? Like, what was the process that made you wonder if anything that was going on is real? Or not?
So, by the way, for your viewers, this is the latest issue of Skeptic. This is our 30th anniversary this year, and we just did a redesign, and we're taking on a very non-controversial subject, trans matters. So, and our next one is on race, and then the one after that is on nationalism. So, we're kind of expanding our horizons to because you can only do so many articles on astrology. Is it true, or can psychics talk to the dead, or is Bigfoot real, or or UFOs landing at the White House?
Right.
You can only do those so many times. And they always turn up to be non-existent or next to no evidence. And so in science, we have this idea called the null hypothesis. That is, your hypothesis is not true until proven otherwise. So, if you say, well, I think Bigfoot's real, like, okay, well, show me the body. What have you got? Well, I don't have a body, but I've got some grainy videos and some blurry photographs. And if you squint and kind of look at the shadow in that tree over there, it sort of looks like a bipedal primate. Well, sorry, that in biology, to name a new species, you actually have to have a type specimen. Like, Here it is. I found it on the side of the road. It was a roadkill or something, and now it's in the museum.
Saying Harry and
dissected.
You're saying Harry and the Hendersons was not real.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
That's going to be rough for our audience to come to grips with, to be honest, because they all thought that was
in the recent flap, right? Yes, in the recent flap over the UFOs, UAP, so-called UAP videos from the Navy. Again, this is just pretty typical of the kind of evidence we're given. That is, they're kind of grainy videos. You can't quite make out what's going on, and that's particularly dangerous for how our perceptual systems work and cognitive psychology. That is, we fill in the gaps. When you can't quite make out what's going on, your imagination fills in the gaps. and comes up with all kinds of things. And in science, we need more definitive evidence than that. It's got to be really clear cut so that you can see it and I can see it. And, I like to say, I don't want to believe in things that you have to believe in for them to be real. I mean,
Right.
They have to be really real, not just what I think is real or you think is real, but what we can all look at with our own eyes.
Like demonstrably true things. I mean, another way, Hitchens' razor is one that I invoke quite a bit. Like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Now this null.
Oh, that's Sagan, Carl Sagan.
Oh, he's okay. So the null hypothesis, I think, is with the rise of social media. It seems like it just kind of takes advantage of people's proclivity to ignore whatever else is going on and just apply confirmation bias to everything they do. And I wonder, like, what from your perspective, you do a lot of psychological research or commentary and things like that. I wonder what you think about modern Western sociology and psychology and how our brains are being primed to just believe whatever one group or another group tells us without any kind of rigor, academic rigor applied to it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was writing my next big book on conspiracies, of why anybody could possibly believe the QAnon conspiracy theory. That is that Hillary Clinton is running a secret satanic cult out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. to drink the blood of children. How can anyone possibly believe that? And yet huge percentages of people say they believe it. And these are not crazy people. These are normal people. They have jobs and they have families and they go about daily life in a pretty rational way. So I think what's going on there is there's some tribal signaling, virtue signaling maybe, or, like I am so committed to being, a critic of the Democrats. I'm a good Republican, and that I'm willing to signal that I believe this crazy idea. So even if you point out, well, somebody actually went to that pizzeria, this guy named Edgar Welch with his gun to break up the pedophile ring, which is what you would do if you really believed there was a crime going on and the police wouldn't do anything about it. So he went there and discovered not only is there no basement, there's no pedophile ring and the pizza wasn't even that good. And so, so you point that out and the response is something like, yeah, okay, that one's not true. But that's the kind of thing Democrats would do. Because they're evil people or something like that. So it's more of a kind of a tribal belief. It isn't literally true. Whether it's literally true or not is kind of beside the point. I make the analogy like with religious beliefs or some political truths that, they're the kind of things we adhere to and we defend separately than we would some empirical truth that you would find in science.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it does. It seems like the binary nature of our political systems. And I don't know if maybe it's always been the case that we choose one side or the other, and maybe it's paralysis through analysis if there's more than one option, or more than two options, rather. I don't know why there hasn't been major third parties, I guess, in American politics at least. There have been blips. There have been independent blips, Green Party blips, libertarian blips here and there. But for the most part, and I know it's just the establishment protecting itself and fighting to make sure nobody else captures any of their territory, but it does seem like, and the point you made was people that are Republican might be anti-Democrat, and anything the Democrats say they have to be anti that. But it's the inverse of that is true as well. Like the Republicans, if a Republican says it, they're probably going to agree with it as well, and the Democrats are going to agree with their person, but without actually understanding whether or not anything is true or not.
Yes, exactly right. So this is called motivated reasoning. You mentioned confirmation bias, which is part of that. We're motivated to win our arguments rather than figure out what's actually true. Of course, we want to know what's true, but we also want to know that our team is right. And so you have that kind of tension between the two. And sometimes the facts get evaluated properly when they support your belief, and then they get twisted and rationalized and spin doctored when they don't support your belief. So it's not that people are across the board irrational. We can evaluate, say, healthcare plans or immigration policy quite rationally if it's somebody on our team that proposed it. My congressman proposed this immigration policy. I already like him. Okay, so I'm going to evaluate the evidence pretty clearly. But if it's the other side, then I'm going to evaluate very critically. And, so the facts don't just speak for themselves.
So how do you, given the motivated reasoning, and maybe that's just something that's happened in our brains over the years, how do you address that in an argument or a debate with somebody else who's doing that, and how do you address it in yourself? I mean, I know one strategy is to steel man the other person's argument, right? That's a good thing. But do you have any other thoughts on that? How to address that?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Can you actually articulate what the other person is saying? And that's a good place to start, because it gets the conversation rolling in a non-confrontational way. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. Are you saying X, 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 X? And the person almost always says, no, that's not what I'm saying. Here's what I'm saying. And so by going back and forth, at least there's a sense that you're listening and you're trying to understand what the other person is saying. So that reduces the levels of hostility and anger that typically arise when you start talking about, politics at the dinner table kind of thing, or religion.
But it also puts everybody's cards on the table too, right? I mean, it's not so if anybody's trying to obfuscate what their plan actually is, that process kind of eliminates their ability to do so.
Yes, exactly. Let's not play word games. Just tell me what you think. Just be as clear as you can. I want to understand. And then from there, you can go to, well, where did you hear that? Or where did you get those facts? And where did they come? Are you sure that source is trustworthy? I heard it on, maybe you should get some additional sources just in case, because, those aren't the most reliable. So, well, I heard in the New York Times. Okay, that's good. What about the Wall Street Journal? Check them too. In other words, have multiple sources for your information, because, we know that, most sources have a particular kind of bias.
It's a good point. People ask me all the time, where do I go for news? How do I stay informed and figure out what the hell is happening? I mean, I pretty much read everything that I can get my hands on, and then, I guess, deliberate internally on what makes sense and what doesn't, but there's always going to be unknowns there. What's your process? How you actually run a magazine, like a publication that's dedicated to being skeptical and finding out the truth. So what's the process you go through to do that?
Well, for me, again, I do check multiple sources. I am old school. I read multiple newspapers, actually physical newspapers every day: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, and the local Santa Barbara paper here. And I read a lot. I mean, it's just so easy to do now. You just click from one source to another. And, when I hear something, I want to, okay, let's see, where'd that come from? Okay. I don't know about that source. I've never heard of it. So let's check some other places to see if they've, heard of this claim. And what's the quality of the evidence? How was it collected? Who did it? Did they have a track record of being reliable or not? And the source itself, are they reliable, or they have a track record of not being reliable? So you just kind of ask those kind of kick the tires sort of questions before you buy the car. Look under the hood, and just be a kind of a practical consumer of information, like you would anything else. And people are pretty good about that. When they shop for homes or cars or whatever, they do read the consumer reports. They do look at the different evaluations, and the idea that people are not rational, they're not capable of evaluating numbers, statistics, data. That's not true. Sports fans devour sports statistics like crazy. They can do it. Or the weather, everyone can evaluate weather reports. Okay, so why can't we do that with everything else, any other claim? And so that's kind of our mission.
Well, that's definitely something we're missing, I think, in American society, at least. The legacy media, particularly cable news, has gone out of its way to just lie about everything they can. At first, I just thought they were biased and kind of incompetent, but now it seems pretty narrowly focused on pushing an agenda. And I, frankly, have a hard time even with some of the print publications and some of the stuff they do. We're seeing and not just bias in the writing, which you're going to have at least some of that, as you mentioned, but censoring dissent, which I think is to me, that's a red flag that the person doesn't actually believe what they're saying. Like if they're trying to shout you down or whatever, they don't even believe what they're saying. They're just trying to do something, and that makes me very what's the phrase or what's the word I'm looking for? It makes me very paranoid, I guess. Like if somebody's trying to lie to me and then yell at me for pointing out that they're lying, that makes me extremely paranoid about what their agenda might be.
Yes. Well, we have to remember, like those evening shows on cable, they're really more entertainment than news. I mean, even Fox, the Fox News daytime shows, the actual news shows, they're pretty good. They really mostly just present the facts. Same thing with the CNN daytime guys. The evening ones, that's just think of it more like remember Larry King show?
Oh yeah.
That was in the entertainment division of CNN, not the news division. And that's where Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, they belong in the entertainment portion or division of Fox, not the news division. They're not journalists. They're entertainers. They're there to get ratings, and they do that. And MSNBC, same thing. They purport to be presenting the news, like Rachel Maddow, and she's pretty good. She has a team of researchers. She presents a lot of stuff, but it's definitely angled and biased. 100%. I don't trust the angle. Again, the fact she has lots of facts, but I don't trust, because the facts don't speak for themselves. Which facts are you not telling me? You're giving me those, but what am I not hearing about? And that's what a good journalist would do.
I mean, you know this. You've done graduate research. You can't write a paper without at least adding what the dissent and at some point, right towards the end of your paper, like this is what might be wrong with this, or this is what some people say, but here's my response to that. But we don't really do that anymore because it would require like too much effort, maybe. I think it's a distrust that the media and patrician class have and the common folk. Like they're not smart enough or intellectually sophisticated enough to absorb all the information and to make a decision. So they try to shield you from certain information or yell at you for believing certain information instead of just laying all the facts out on the table.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there is kind of a bigotry of low expectations amongst media people about the public, and I think that's wrong. I think people can evaluate evidence. We are pretty rational. We're more intelligent than producers think. It's a long time beef of mine. That these shows on aliens, ancient aliens, and all the ghost hunting shows, and they almost never present a skeptical perspective. Why? And it's because they're afraid that people don't want to know, or they'll be too dumb to evaluate two different ideas at the same time, or that the ratings are going to go down if we tell the truth about this particular claim, or if we present another side. That's not true. It's absolutely not true.
It's the opposite of true. If you're not as I said before, if you don't steel man the other person's argument and then address it directly, then you don't really believe what you're saying, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like this ancient alien shows, I just can't watch it anymore. It's, the topics are fun and interesting, but it's like, here we are on Easter Island and no one has any idea how these statues were carved. That's not true. And then they'll have one of the ancient alien guys on there. Could it be alien? Why don't you have someone like Joanne Van Tilburg at UCLA, who's been going to Easter Island every year for 40 years and has books about how the Easter Island statues were carved, how they were moved, and excavated there and so on. We do have an idea. Or the pyramids, how are these pyramids, made? Well, we have some ideas about that. Well, no one knows, so it could be aliens. No, we actually do know.
Isn't that kind of just the same thing that religion's been doing for a long time? Like anywhere there's a gap in our information, it's either you've got a phrase for it, something about it being magic. I can't remember exactly how it goes.
Yeah, there's the God of the gaps argument.
Yeah,
wherever there's a gap, that's where we're going to put God into, and then the other one is mystery, therefore magic.
Yeah, that's
it's a mystery. I can't figure it out, therefore it's magic, or supernatural or paranormal. No, it's good to remember those are just words we use. Paranormal, supernatural, they don't exist. They're just words we use to fill in the gap of some mystery. And once the mystery gets explained, then it's no longer paranormal, supernatural. It's part of the natural world that we study, or it just goes away because there was nothing to explain.
Well, I mean, so I don't remember who it is that said this. It may have been Dan Dennett or somebody like that. But he was like, at no point in human history has a new religious text shown up and disproven something that we believed in science, that we've proven through science, right? It's always been the opposite of that for a long time.
Yes, exactly.
And you know,
exactly.
I don't know why people get so bent out of shape about that. I mean, if you believe in some kind of deity, doesn't it seem like that kind of person? Like if I build a house and then I'm a carpenter and I start building other shit inside of my house, I still built the house. You know what? I'm using the natural processes under which that house was built to build more. That's kind of, it seems like that would follow. But for whatever reason, like I don't believe in anything. But like you said, I don't like to believe in anything that I have to believe in. That's a really good way to say that, because that doesn't make any sense to me. Anyways, let's talk about everybody wants to hear about. Oh no, go ahead and respond to that.
Well, so I make a distinction between religious truths and scientific truths, and those latter, the religious truths, I put into a larger category of mythic truths. They're sort of mythically true. So, if a religion makes a claim about something and says this actually really happened, I mean, it's the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus was killed and he was resurrected from the dead. Now, do you mean that mythically? Because there's lots of stories of virgin births and resurrections in history, but those are myths, they're stories. And by myth here, I don't mean not true. I mean myth like in a story, like a novel or some mythic story that whether it's true or not is irrelevant. It carries a message,
like
a moral
Zeus.
homily, something you're supposed to take, like Zeus,
Yeah.
something you're supposed to take away from about to apply to your personal life or to society or whatever. And so if that's what you mean, I accept Jesus is my savior or something like that, but I don't mean that it's really true, literally true. Well, then, okay, then that I don't really have a beef with that, because you're not claiming it to be justified true belief or knowledge or empirical truths like in science.
Right.
And here I'll tell you a funny story. So that I've mentioned on my podcast before. So Richard Dawkins and I are at this conference with Ken Miller, who is a world renowned biologist and debunker of intelligent design creationism. But he's also a Catholic, and he wrote this great book debunking the creationists. But then the last chapter, he says, well, by the way, I'm a Catholic and I believe that Jesus, was resurrected from the dead. So Dawkins starts down this little path in the conversation, so if we found a piece of the true cross, and on a piece of the true cross, there was a little bit of flesh, and we were able to extract the DNA from Jesus. Since he was born of a virgin, he can't have, a regular DNA sequence like normal humans. He must be godlike, or must be something. And Miller kind of interrupted him and said, Richard, I'm not claiming any of this is true. This is just what I believe. I'm a Catholic. This is what we believe.
Well, that's like cultural religion, right?
Okay.
That's like
almost whatever you mean.
Almost all of my Jewish friends, and especially those who either now live in Israel or were there back in the day, I'm not sure they actually believe as literal truth anything about that. I mean, it's just it's almost like a cultural thing at that point, right?
Yes, right. Yes, that's right. That's a good way to put it. It's more like a tradition. This is just what we do. We have this food on this particular date to honor this event that happened in our history. And, poking around in the details of exactly what part of it is true is kind of missing the point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as long as they're not being dicks about it, there's no reason to you don't want to disabuse somebody of their ability to live their life the way they want to. I know you're a libertarian and you believe that to your core, because that is libertarianism.
Right.
But as long as people aren't being evangelic or trying to affect policy and affect other people's lives, I think it's, and I also think it's extremely beneficial to the group, like whomever it happens to be, to like whatever process you have to build and strengthen and carry on community is a good thing. We're seeing a lot of weird shit is happening lately. Like a lot of different things have taken the place of religion over the last 25 years. And at least religion was old, and we knew that it was like we could deal with that. But all these new things, like becoming a partisan politic person, or believing that biology that we've known for thousands of years isn't real and shit like that. It's like these things have become like a de facto religion to people. And the problem is they're making empirical claims not about where the world or universe came from, but what it's like right now. And that has daily impact on our life. You know what I mean? If we're not operating with the correct information, that's a big deal.
Yes, it's like John McWhorter's analogy of anti-racism movement, the whole BLM movement and so on, as being kind of like a religion, where everyone has original sin. We're all racists, and you have to atone for your sins and be forgiven, and you can never really completely cleanse yourself of the sin, and on and on. He has a whole book about this, and it's an interesting analogy. I don't think it's literally a religion because there's no Godhead, but it's metaphorically religious like. It's religious like. It has characteristics of it, and I think what you're talking about there is these political movements and social movements engage our religious energies, let's say, to get behind some particular cause and
Right.
follow it enthusiastically. And people do that.
Something bigger than yourself that becomes a big part of your identity. That it's not unique to modern culture. That's always been the case with human beings, so far as I could tell. I went to
we're tribal, we're social. We
sure,
want to belong to groups. That's normal, and most groups are good. Most groups you join don't turn out to be cults or crazy political coup type organizations or ISIS or anything like that. Most groups are good, so it's okay to do that. It's just be wary of how far down the path this particular group is going. If it takes you to the Capitol steps on January 6th, where you break into the Capitol, well, maybe you should rethink. This one might have gone a little too far.
Yeah, that's stupid. Someone in the chat here mentioned scientism becoming a new religion. How do you feel about that appeal?
I'm familiar with the argument. Yeah.
How do you feel about the appeal to the science, like a monolith of the science, as if it's a moment in time or a single, like the science is this now and then it's that later? Well, that's not really how that works, right? Science is always learning new things, hopefully.
That's right. Yes, that's right. There's no dogmatic snapshot we take and say, follow the science on this particular date because that's the final truth. As we saw in the last 2 years, the story keeps changing because the evidence keeps changing. Right. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, cloth mask versus N95 mask, this vaccine, that vaccine, do you need a booster or not? The story keeps changing. So people that get frustrated with that, it's understandable, but that's just the way it is. And the reason for that is because none of us are omniscient. We're not God. We don't know. And therefore we have to apply the best tools we have of reasoning, rationality, and science. And they're always going to be imperfect. There's always going to be disagreement. And so when you say follow the science, you kind of mean the consensus. Like, what do most scientists say? Yes, I know you can always find somebody that's out there that says, no, this is all bullshit. But what do most people think? And that's a reasonable heuristic or rule of thumb to follow. It works most of the time.
Certainly. I guess it's been the case for a while, but especially with the rise of telecommunications and its involvement with the government since its inception, from the time we were sending wires to people. You know what I mean? There's a story about Rutherford B. Hayes realizing he was about to lose the Electoral College, and then the AP and Western Union kind of helped him. It's in, what's the name of that book? I think it's over here somewhere. Shit, I'll have to look it up. I'll figure it out here. It's Tim Wu is the author. What's the name of the book I'm thinking of? Yeah, the Master Switch. If you've never read that, it's a very interesting book about how.
No, I don't know that one.
I think he's an MIT guy, but it's about how government, since the dawn of humanity, anytime a new technology rises, the government tries to grab it as hard as they can and keep everybody else from getting it, and also weaponize it against other countries and sometimes their own population, whether it was the internet or the printing press or anything like that.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure about that generalization. I mean, governments do have a role in helping to launch new industries, in so-called infant industries. Economists make the argument that this is actually a good thing, that, certain big projects, moonshot type projects can't be done by solo entrepreneurs.
Right.
Although Elon Musk may be an exception to this rule. But, if you want to make a transcontinental railroad, how do you get all that land? Well, the government just, steps in and says, all right, we're going to just give you this land because it's ours, and we're going to lease it to you. And then you have to pay us this. And then, well, what about competitors? All right, well, we'll give you a monopoly on it for a while. And, so on and so on. Those kind of deals are made all the time, mining rights and farming rights and all that stuff, because who owns the land? Well, that's a legal matter. And so you do have governments involved in that. And the internet is certainly one of those. I mean, it initially developed as a Department of Defense, DARPA project for communicating between, different divisions and bases and whatnot over the internet that didn't exist. Somehow we're going to do this through computers, and then that became the internet. And then now we have what we have. But all that required a lot of government activity involved in granting licenses to have certain bandwidths and all that. Same thing with radio and television. That's pretty normal. It's the libertarian idea that, well, just let entrepreneurs do whatever they want, and if they fail, they fail. Well, but it'd be pretty hard to get, I mean, again, Elon Musk the exception, to have the infrastructure set up to get going is hard for anybody. You need a lot of money. So it could be that this could change now, because there is so much money, there's so much wealth going around. And, Elon, to his credit, took his, whatever it was, $450 million payout from PayPal. And then instead of, buying cars and sitting on the beach, he decided to launch an electric car company and then a space rocket company. Okay. So, but he came pretty close to failing. And, I have a Tesla, so I've kind of watched the infrastructure develop, and now there's chargers everywhere, not just Tesla charger stations, but I see them going up pretty much in the same locations where Elon put his charger stations of other chargers for other cars, Ford and GM and BMW, and they're all doing it. So this is going to happen. But it took a lot of, Elon is, yes, he's a great entrepreneur, but he's had a lot of government help, a lot of breaks. Yeah. I've gotten it. I got $2,500 back from the state of California for buying a Tesla. I got a check, and from the IRS, I get $7,500 taken off my taxable income for owning a Tesla. Okay, Elon didn't do that. The government did that because they want to nudge us toward renewable energy sources and that sort of thing. In the same way that I get a tax break because I'm married, I get to deduct the interest on the mortgage of my home I'm sitting in here. Yeah, because the government says, well, we want people to have kids and families. We want our citizens to own homes. So we're going to give them a break, and so on.
Very interesting. Yeah, and Elon has been trying since 2013 or so to get the government to match funds. I actually did bodyguard work back in the day, and I was at the Edison Electric Institute annual thing. I was doing bodyguard work for General Petraeus at the time. I think it was 2014.
Wow.
And Elon was one of the guest speakers, and he had this plan to put like a honeycomb-shaped pattern of charging stations all over the country. And he was going to spend $11 billion of his own. And by the way, $11 billion of his own money back then was a lot more of his wealth than it is now. But he was going to spend $11 billion of his own money over 10 years, and the federal government was going to match those funds. At least that's what he was asking for. And there would never be, nowhere in the United States would you ever be farther than like 100 miles from a charging station or something like that. And
well, that's pretty much happened now. I mean, you can drive across the country. I can drive from LA here to Vegas, no problem.
Right.
And that's across the desert. There's charger stations out there, and not just me, not just Tesla, but there's others out there now too.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely coming along. Although I would say there's a lot of uppityness with some of that. Like, oh, I drive a clean vehicle. Like, with the vehicle itself may not make emissions, but where did the energy come from that went into your vehicle in the first place? You know what I mean? It's not always the best source.
I thought it was the energy fairy that gave me free electricity. That's not true?
No, I guess not. But yeah, it's absolutely the railroads, as you mentioned, the interstate highway system, all of these things were public-private cooperatives.
Yes.
And it's, I mean, that's nothing new for sure. Everybody wants to hear about aliens these days.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that.
You may be somebody that's researched different theories on this more than anybody else. Well, from a position of not just trying to understand it so you can talk to other people about it, but actually like the merits of the argument. So I'm wondering, the Nimitz, those images have been pretty compelling for a lot of people. Now, my understanding is the 1940s and 50s, when a lot of people were seeing these things, these are like hypersonic test aircraft and things like that, probably, that are bouncing around. But some of these some of these videos from the Nimitz, the object moves in a way that we don't know how to make things move. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean
that's what it appears to do.
Right. Yeah.
But you have to understand that these are being filmed by a camera on the bottom of a jet that's rotating. They're on these gyroscopic devices that rotate the camera. So it's not clear what's moving. Is it the object that's being filmed, or is it the camera that's moving so that it makes the object appear to move faster than it does? The guy that's done the heavy lifting on this is Mick West. He's a columnist for Skeptic, and he has his own website, Metabunk. I would direct people to. He's got just fantastic videos on each of those, kind of evaluating each of the different claims. They're all slightly different. There's one, for example, where the object is white and it's a certain size and it's dead center of the film, and there's a little frame around it, and all of a sudden it shoots off to the left. And the guy goes, oh my God, wow, look at that. And people doing evaluations of that video say, well, it just shot to the left at some enormous speed, like 10 times the speed of sound. How could that possibly happen? We have no technology to do that. The pilot would be killed, and so on. But as Mick pointed out, if you look in the upper left of that frame, it says zoom. That's the zoom, and it goes from 1 to 2. So the camera zoomed on the object. So the object is actually not moving at all. It's going that way because the frame is moving closer to it.
Oh boy.
And each of these videos has an explanation along those lines. They're not perfect. The government has not come out and said, yes, that's the explanation. They've been disturbingly quiet about these videos, and the videos are not new. They're new in pop culture, but they date back more than a decade. And then much is made about the New York Times covering it. The New York Times said they're real. Okay, first of all, when you say they're real, what's the they? It's the videos. The videos are real, not CGI. They're not fake. So they're not saying that the objects are really aliens, which is what people seem to hear when they hear that phrase, they're real. And the New York Times article is written by Leslie Kean, who is a longtime pro-ufologist. And Leslie wrote a best-selling book called UFOs. And in her book, and I cite her book, she says 95% of all sightings are fully explainable by normal natural things. If there's swamp gas, it's geese, it's a flock of birds, it's a bunch of planes, it's weather balloons, it's the planet Venus. There's like 100 different things that people think they see in the sky and misinterpret that end up having natural causes. So then we're down to, well, what's the other 5%? And the answer is it's just unknown. Not extraterrestrial, not Russian or Chinese drones. It's just we don't know what they are. Full stop. So the U in UFO is just unidentified. That's all it means. It doesn't mean extraterrestrial. Doesn't mean government cover-up. Right. Doesn't mean the Russian. And by the way, on that, since we're dealing with the Russians now, that business that the UAPs represent, not aliens, but Russian or Chinese, super advanced technology. I mean, they're like decades or centuries ahead of us. Impossible. That's back to your history of technology. That's not how technology develops. No invention has ever been made that didn't have a previous step and a previous step, and other people know about it. I mean, governments copy each other. They steal from each other. Corporations copy each other and steal from each other. The Manhattan Project was the most secret project in the history of the world, and the Russians had the bomb within 4 years. They stole our plans. They had a spy, right? And, Google and Apple have just enormous resources for intellectual property protection and security on site of their campus and so on. And yet still every computer, all the search, they're all pretty much the same. All the smartphones are the same. They all do the same thing. How is that possible if, they have all these protections? Because we're good at copying and stealing other people's ideas. So there's no way the Russians or Chinese could have these drones or planes that could do things that our planes can't do. We would know about it. Okay, so then the extraterrestrial hypothesis is unlikely, not impossible. And here I'll just make a general point that the question, are they out there, is different from have they come here?
Right.
So the SETI scientists that study the possibility of life on other planets in our solar system or elsewhere, extra solar system planets, which we're getting the technology online now to be able to evaluate the light coming from a star behind a planet that passes through its atmosphere, and we can then measure that light and see if there are chemical elements in the atmosphere that would only be produced by living organisms. Okay.
Like greenhouse gases and things like that, or what do you mean?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, like oxygen, more oxygen that would be produced naturally from volcanic activity, or something that would be produced by plants. That would be an indication that that planet has living organisms, even though you can't even see the planet; it's too far away. That's amazing technology. So all of that is along the lines of that. We assume that we're not natural, or we're not normal. That is to say, we're the Copernican principle. We're not special. Sorry, I misspoke that we are normal. We're not special. We're not the only ones in the cosmos. That seems reasonable. I suspect the trillions of planets that are out there, that there's other living organisms, and there's also probably extraterrestrial intelligence. But that's a different question than have they come here. Now, to be fair, we have no evidence to say yes on either one of them. Right? We have no signals, no contact like sequence of prime numbers, like in Carl Sagan's Contact with Jodie Foster with the cans on her head, listening to the beeping sound. We have nothing like that yet, and we have no UFOs here. I mean, we have lots of grainy videos and blurry photographs, but no alien spaceships or bodies, none. All we have is negative evidence. They're hiding them in Area 51. That's why we don't have any evidence. Okay, that's a flawed argument. It's the same argument George W. Bush used when he invaded Iraq on the premise of weapons of mass destruction, and they couldn't find them. And the initial response is, that's how we know they have them, because they hid them so carefully and they moved them. We can't find them. It's like, no, that doesn't count as evidence.
Well, technically, we knew they had them because we sold them to them in the first place. But we also
in the day.
we also oversaw the destruction allegedly. So, but yeah, I want to get into this alien thing a little bit more.
Yeah, let's do that.
I heard on one of your recent podcasts you were talking about, you and your guests were talking about the Drake equation, and how even a small, or even an extremely conservative view on the Drake equation might produce like 36 intelligent civilizations in our galaxy, which would be like trillions of intelligent civilizations, basically.
In the universe, yes.
Yeah. Right. It seems to me that I mean, I get that it's all theoretical, right? Because we don't know. It would be weird if we were alone.
Right. We don't know.
It would be very weird if we were alone.
It would be weird.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not the case. But it does seem likely. And the one thing that I can't get past is traveling through space. It takes so much time. You know what I mean? A civilization that has figured out how to generate enough energy and mass in the location to create a wormhole or whatever we're talking about, however we're talking about, or to some of these theories about spacecraft that use gravity to travel instead of propulsion and things like that, without ripping a human being to pieces or whatever, like an organic body to pieces. I figure if a civilization has progressed far enough to figure that out, they might be able to cruise right by us and we would never know. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the big problem for space travel, I think, is this is all so large. We could never hope to know all of this, right?
This is my answer to the Fermi Paradox, which is, where is everybody? If you follow the argument you just made, and that they would be exploring the entire galaxy within like 10 to 100 million years, and we're billions of years old. So okay, where are they? They should be here. And so there's like 50 different answers to this question. One of which is they're very small. It's just AI robots. They're not actual organic beings that are exploring the galaxy, or they're doing it not even physically, just through some kind of like kind of almost a cyber, like just laser beams or whatever that carry information, or they use cloaking devices, right? It's the zoo hypothesis that they're watching us and they don't want us to see us them watching us. And so they're cloaked. There's Star Trek episodes about that. And, all that is possible. More likely, it's just what you said. It's mostly empty space. And it's just vast distances between solar systems. It's just stunning how far apart they are. If two galaxies pass through each other, like the Andromeda galaxy will pass through the Milky Way galaxy in several billion years, apparently, and it's likely the 100 billion stars in our galaxy won't hit any of the 100 billion stars in their galaxy, even though when you look at them, they look pretty dense.
Right.
But it's mostly empty space. So again, analogies help. If our sun was the size of an orange and it was here in LA, I don't know where you are, but if the closest sun to us, the Alpha Centauri system, would be another orange in Chicago, 2,000 miles away, right? So what are the chances of those orange colliding? None. It's just mostly just empty space. And that's the problem. I just think if they're out there, they haven't found us because they just missed us. I mean, it's hard to find.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people are really realize that. Like you look at astronomical figures, and then you look at something like Saturn and its rings and how close, in astronomical terms, those rings are together, but they still don't collide. Despite being relatively close to one another. Somebody, I can't remember who it was. It may have been Tyson, but he said that if the I'm taking this down to the micro level now. So, an atom, if the Rose Bowl was an atom, the nucleus would be the size of a golf ball on the 50-yard line. Basically, is the comparison he made.
Right.
And that's so. It's not just the universe as we know it that's huge. It's the space between things is always huge, and that seems like to be the one consistent thing between the micro world and the macro world to me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, right. Lots of gaps. Although in the case of atoms, they're vibrating, they're jiggling. That's the reason your cup and your laptop and whatever that thing is that a gun?
Yes, sir.
On your desk?
Yeah, sure is.
Doesn't fall through the wood, because the atoms in the wood are solid and the atoms in the gun are solid. And even though the atoms themselves are made of mostly empty space, but they're jiggling. They have, the little electrons going around the nucleus of the atom, and it's essentially like a solid object at our level. Anyway, so yeah, so aliens, what could be more fascinating? I think it's back to religion. It's almost like a religious impulse. I call them deities for atheists, sky gods for skeptics. It's the idea that there's somebody out there that knows we're here, that's more advanced than us, maybe even omniscient, or apparently omniscient, all powerful, which a sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence or far future human civilization would be essentially omniscient and omnipotent.
Well, that's Arthur C. Clarke, right?
Yes.
What's
right.
a sufficiently advanced
technology?
Sufficiently
advanced technology
like
is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah. So I changed that. And I took that and ran with it with indistinguishable from God.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sufficiently advanced. Yeah. So again, just look what we've been able to accomplish in the last century, and just extrapolate that out 100 centuries or 1,000 centuries, and we would seem godlike to. Already, we would seem godlike to a Neanderthal. You hold up show them a cell phone and a smartphone, and you'd be deified.
Yeah, for sure. What's your you've addressed a lot of these conspiracies over the years. What's your favorite? Like, which one is the most compelling to you?
Oh, well, yeah. In my book, I have chapters on JFK. That one seems to never go away. Always interesting. I do think it's a lone assassin, but the alternative theories are interesting. 9/11 truthers have kind of bumped JFK as they're pretty persistent. That George W. Bush was involved in it somehow. The QAnon, I'm pretty baffled by QAnon, how anybody could believe it. But again, I think it's a proxy conspiracy theory for something else. The larger rigged election conspiracy, that the Democrats are cheating, and the Republicans are not winning as many elections because of the shenanigans of the voting system and the Democrats. And I think it taps a lot of political divisiveness as a conspiracy theory. And that one I'm really worried about for 2024, because There's still people now, like in Wisconsin. 60 Minutes had a show Sunday on Wisconsin, still pursuing the 2020 election to try to overturn it. It's like, oh my God, you guys should be focusing on 2024, getting whoever your candidates are going to be to win instead of 2 years ago now. And Trump's going to run again probably, and I don't know if anybody could beat him in the primary. Maybe DeSantis or Mitt Romney. I don't know, but probably not the way it's going. And more Republicans today now than ever say that they think the election was rigged. Okay, this is a conspiracy theory in the highest levels of government and society. This is not a fringe problem, and I'm worried about that. So what's true really matters. The election was not rigged. It was a fair election, as fair as any you can have. There's always a tiny bit of voter fraud, but not enough to make a difference. And the fact that Attorney General Barr, who is a staunch Republican, conservative, bona fides are as good as they get, says, no, sorry, we looked into it. There's just nothing there. That should end the story, but it doesn't. So there's something else going on. I'm very worried about.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big problem for me with all that is that if you continue to use that as your reason, because we always look for reason in things. If you use that conspiracy for your reason that things happen this way, then you don't address, like if you're a Republican, you believe in republicanism and things like that. If you just write it off to a stolen election, then you don't actually address the faults in your party for not having a good ground game and getting people to vote, or being able to point out that, hey, you guys all voted for this dude and it doesn't seem to be going that well. Maybe you should rethink it next time. You can't make any of those points if you're still stuck on this other bullshit.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So what's going on in science now, beyond all the conspiracy shit? What's going on in science now that you're super excited about? I'm sure James Webb is part of it, but there's a lot of stuff going on these days.
Well, there's a lot of neuroscience that's pretty interesting, trying to understand how the brain works. I think that's important. It's important for medical purposes because of all the baby boomers like me that are going to be hitting the wall and getting Alzheimer's and dementia and all that stuff. So, the scientific breakthroughs and understanding that I think are important, and even understanding consciousness and what it is. I think we're making some progress there that didn't even used to be on the table for that. I think the climate change thing is another one of these polarized subjects. But again, I'd rather focus on the future and all right, let's figure out ways to shift from fossil fuels to renewables. I do think nuclear has to be in the equation. I don't see how you can get enough energy, particularly as all these developing countries come online. And they want the same energy we have because they want all the stuff we have, and they want the quality of life we have, and they should have that. So how can we get that? I don't see you can get that with solar and wind and geothermal. I think you need nuclear. And again, that's another thing I'm worried about is that, like Germany going offline on nuclear, and Japan probably, and, and here in California closing nuclear power plants. That's the wrong direction. And part of the problem is we have a zero tolerance for any failure at all because of the fear of another Chernobyl. Even though in 3 Mile Island was the worst one here, no one died, not one person died.
Yeah.
And so, but people hear that and they think, well, I'd rather have my coal. Yeah, well, thousands of people die every year from coal related, fossil fuel related jobs, and but it's the devil versus the devil you don't know, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird to me that. Even in China, I think 70% of their energy still comes from wood and coal. That seems like, I guess there's a lot of hinterland in China. I mean, there's big cities and they have a large population, but that's still super bizarre to me. And yeah, about the nuclear thing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Michael Shermer. He's written quite a bit about.
Yeah, I know Michael. Yeah,
he's a good dude. We've had him on the show. He just wrote something a couple of weeks ago, actually, on Barry Weiss's Substack about how we basically fucked ourselves over by, I agree with you. I think that we should try to be as good of stewards of our planet as possible. That just seems reasonable to me. Anybody that was in the military or in the Boy Scouts, you leave shit better than what you found it, right? I mean, that's kind of the ethos there.
Yes.
But green energy, if you want to call it that, is not really ready for prime time yet, especially in large countries like ourselves. So
Right.
Shutting down these nuclear plants has really backed us into a corner.
Yes.
I don't understand why they did that. Like, I understand it if it's like, well, we're going to shut these down because necessity is the mother of invention. Science doesn't necessarily work that way. Like, we don't have the ability to store enough solar energy or transport it right now. And by the way, all the fiber chips for that are made in China. So, it's a
Right.
big problem from a
Yes.
security standpoint to have our energy independence in Russia and China and Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's still places on Earth where they burn cow pies for energy.
Oh boy.
It's just that is brutal. Yeah, I mean, we got to get everybody up to speed here, and we got to move forward in a positive direction rather than obsessing about reducing our amount of energy consumption. That's just not going to. First of all, it's not going to happen. But second of all, why go backwards? Why not go forward? There's too many people. We need to go back. No, just how about educate people and use birth control, and that populations will naturally go down. They are going down. They're going to peak at about 10 billion. We're at about 8 billion later this year. They'll peak at about 10 or 11 billion, and then go back down to about where we are now in 2021. At the end of this century, and then probably down even more because there's quite a few countries now that are below replacement level. Russia's one of them, by the way. Their populations are shrinking by millions of people every decade, and so it's stunning that this could happen, but it can. In other parts of the world, it's not. It's the opposite of that in some of the developing countries, simply because they don't have the education and the technology, birth control technology, and the empowerment of women and more powerful economies. Because when you do that, population levels just naturally go down. Family sizes go down.
Right.
And we know this. It's easy to implement. Religion is a big problem for that, because some religions anyway, they're in the old mode. Like you need to have as many babies as possible because that's how we grow our religion.
Right.
Okay, but those days are over. We have to stop that.
Yeah, for sure. You said that there's been quite a bit of progress in understanding consciousness. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, I just mean that, explaining the so-called hard problem of consciousness, that, how is it that we're able to have these qualitative experiences of knowing what it's like to be me or you, or have the experience of living or experiencing things. And I think the problem is probably just going to go away once we understand all the underlying networks and how they work and how they operate. A recent analogy I like is that consciousness we've reified it into a thing, like it exists separate, like the mind is separate from the brain. It's not. The mind is just a word. Consciousness is just a word we use for what the brain does when it's active. And like fire, if I light a match and then blow it out and you say, well, where'd the flame go? Well, it didn't go anywhere because it didn't exist. It was just a process. It's a chemical process. It didn't exist, then it did, then it didn't. And its consciousness is probably something like that. Like where were you before you were born? I wasn't anywhere because I didn't have a brain, right? And then you come online, and then you're conscious for however many decades, and then it goes offline. You're gone. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't float off the brain into some quantum field or heaven or whatever. And I think the better we understand that, the better we can, I think, appreciate this life.
Yeah. Maybe take advantage of the life you definitely have and not worry about something that might not exist.
Yeah.
Good. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on, and it's very informative for our people. Just remembering all the little details, specific things we talk about are interesting, but making sure you know how to think and be skeptical about things is really important. So tell people where they can find you, where they can find your work.
Oh, right. Skeptic.com is the place, the portal for the magazine and most of my work. MichaelShermer.com has my personal information and contact information and all that. Books on Amazon, just type in Michael Shermer, you'll see all my books. Or Audible. Audio books are becoming ever more popular. And so that's it. The Michael Shermer Show is my podcast, but the portal through that is Skeptic.com.
All right, great. Really appreciate you coming on today. This was
You're welcome.
super fun.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you guys later.
All right. Okay.